Today's episode of This Week in Startups is brought to you by Mandrill, the best way to send transactional email. From the people who make MailChimp, sign up today at mandrill.com. And by MailChimp, manage lists with up to 2,000 subscribers and send up to 12,000 emails per month for free with MailChimp. And by Amazon Web Services, the fastest growing, hottest startups build their businesses on Amazon Web Services. Learn more at aws.amazon.com/startups.
That's what it's all about, man. They said money is the root of all evil. What? Funny how it feeds my people. Yeah. We ain't gonna live like equals until we get the money, spend the money, and defeat you. Yeah. Money is the root of all evil. What? Funny how it feeds my people. Yeah. We ain't gonna live like equals until we get the money, spend the money, and defeat you.
Hey everybody, it's Jason, and thanks for tuning into this great episode. Daphne Koller is with me, and this is an interview I did with her at the Launch Education and Kids Summit back in June of 2013 at Microsoft's conference facility down in Silicon Valley in Mountain View. And as you know, Coursera is doing massively online courses, and they've been really crushing it. The idea grew out of some experimentation she did at Stanford, and it's pretty controversial. Coursera isn't the only game in town. You've probably heard of Udacity and edX. A lot of different schools are now experimenting with people taking the actual courses from Harvard or MIT or Stanford online, and some folks are even going to let you get degrees from there. It's a fascinating discussion about education, how absolutely screwed up it is, and how absolutely awesome it will become in the coming years. It's a very transitional time for education, and I hope that you enjoy this, what I believe will become a seminal interview of a great company, perhaps the Google of education even, in 10 years. So watch the interview and post some comments below and let us know what you think. We'll talk to you next time. Enjoy.
I guess basically those three players really leading the charge there. And of course you have Lynda, who spent 18 years, sort of almost as a precursor to what you guys are doing. What do you think of Lynda and the massive success?
I think Lynda is doing a wonderful thing. We are big fans of the kind of content that is so incredibly useful to people, and we wish Lynda every success.
Yeah, and she had great things to say about you guys as well. How do you think the two services differ? How do you think in the minds of a consumer when they look at a Coursera course and they look at a course on Lynda, how do you think they compare those two in their own minds?
Well, I mean, I think there's two obvious differences. One is on the content side. Our content is, academic content from the best universities. It's a sort of hardcore academics, and Lynda's content is much more skills-based. How do you take a photograph? How do you use an Excel spreadsheet? Things like that. And I think both have their place and both are valuable. The other obvious difference is that our content is free.
Right.
So I think that plays a lot in the minds of a consumer. But of course, since the content is not comparable, then it's not really a competition.
Yeah, and it seems like one might use Lynda to acquire the skills necessary to take some of these courses.
To some extent, but I honestly think that they go in somewhat different directions in terms of the kinds of things that people want to do in their life.
Let's roll back for a little bit. How did Coursera even start? I mean, what was the genesis of the idea?
So the Coursera has been percolating, if you will, not in any way as a goal, as a Stanford project for the last 5 years or so. And it came about from two complementary directions. One was aimed at improving the quality of education that we offer to our own Stanford students by doing what's called now flipping the classroom, so that instead of having students come into class to be lectured at for an hour and 15 minutes 3 times a week, they come into class already prepared by having watched the content online, practiced with it, achieved a certain level of mastery, and then come to class to do something that's much more engaging and stimulating, active learning. So that's one thread. And the other thread was the whole open courseware direction of let's take content that has been available until now only to a tiny handful of privileged Stanford students and put it out there for the tens of hundreds of thousands or arguably millions of people who could benefit from that kind of material. And so these threads really coalesced and created a lot of energy at Stanford, leading in the fall of 2011 to the 3 large Stanford classes that Stanford put out in computer science that each had an enrollment of 100,000 students or more. And I think that really led to the realization that there was an opportunity here whose magnitude was enormous in terms of affecting positive change in the world. And that really is what led us to sort of think about how to best execute on that opportunity.
Now, it's a commercial venture. It's
Yes.
backed by venture capitalists.
That's right.
And so what is the relationship with universities, and how do they look at it?
So it's a partnership. We have agreements with 83 institutions right now. Some of the best universities in the world. We're very privileged to be able to work with them to provide content freely available to everyone. It's a very simple relationship. It's their content. It's our platform. They develop the content. It's theirs. The IP remains with the university. We provide them with a platform on which the courses can be created, and then we host it and we stream it, and we attempt to bring in revenue to support the whole enterprise, and if that succeeds, then it gets shared back.
And right now I've heard free. Lynda was preaching, hey, let's get people paid. So at what point does paid turn on? I mean, is it pay for paper, as they say? Like, you think the accreditation is the piece that people will pay for?
So we're hoping that we can keep access to content free, because we believe that education should be a basic human right and not something that only the privileged can afford. So the question, of course, is how do you make content free while still making this a sustainable enterprise? And fortunately, there's been case study after case study in internet technology companies in the last few years that freemium can actually work. That is, you can provide premium services on top of a free basic service, and that works. Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Zynga, and so on. So what we hope to do is accreditation, as you said, pay for paper, but it's not just the paper, it's the identity verification that goes with it. Potentially there's other premium services that one could potentially pay for. And then there's an alternative model, which is effectively using this as a textbook that one can provide to an academic institution that wants to provide their students with a better, deeper learning experience than what they can provide using the instructors that they happen to have.
So I'm a community college, and there's a Stanford professor who's just the best at machine learning ever, and just as, I don't know, all-star teacher. They can give the lectures, and the local professor can refer to them and say, like, yeah, well, that was a great performance, and let's solve problems based on that lesson.
That's right, but I want to correct the impression that it's only content going from Stanford to community colleges. For example, one of our big success stories is Vanderbilt, which is a top 20 U.S. news institution that has adopted content from a variety of places, and they have tremendous success with that, because I think everyone realizes they can't have the best professor in every single discipline, and so I think it's going to be a sharing of content that's much more peer-to-peer than just, Stanford going down to community colleges.
Hey, everybody. What a great episode we're having. But it's time to stop for a minute and talk about one of my favorite products in the world, MailChimp. That's it. That's the commercial. MailChimp is amazing. What do we use for the launch mailing list? What do we do for all of our conferences? What do we use for This Week in Startups? What have I used for Jason Nation? What have I used my whole life? MailChimp. Actually, I used my own mail servers in the beginning. I had like an IT department managing it. It was a complete and utter disaster. My emails never got delivered on time. But MailChimp, that's what I use for my mailing list. And you need to have a mailing list. Put it on your blog, put it on your company site. Start collecting the emails of the people who are interested in your product or service. So when you have something new going on in your life, or your company comes out with something new, and you're like, how do I get the word out? You say, oh, I have 17,000 emails. Oh, I got 3,000 emails. Oh, I got 300 emails, whatever it is. Those are your core constituencies, and you need to communicate with them on a regular basis. And you don't need to go through gatekeepers like Facebook or Twitter or these other services that try to charge you to reach your own followers. What you need is to own the email address. Facebook owns the email address. Twitter owns the email address. MySpace, these guys, all they did was own the email address to have that direct relationship. And then they try to BS you by you owning the relationship through Facebook or Twitter. No. Get the email address of your core constituents, and then you have that direct, powerful relationship. It is critical when you're building a startup or any business that you have the email addresses of your key customers. So go to MailChimp.com and you'll get up to 2,000 subscribers a month and 12,000 emails per month for free. These folks over there, they do a kick-ass job. Their product is smooth like butter. The feature set is amazing. They're constantly adding features to it. And they never raise the price. In fact, they lower the prices. So go over there and get the free 2,000 subscribers and 12,000 emails per month. And they just rolled out a new MailChimp. It's got total optimization for tablets, so you can do this kind of stuff from the road. Cleaner design, less clutter, even better team collaboration tools, and there is no contract. There is no trial. The free plan is always free. You pay as you go. I use the product. It works awesomely. It is the best software as a service out there. It's right up there with things I love like Yammer and Dropbox and other services. It's the elite gold standard for email lists. Go to MailChimp. And thank @MailChimp on your Twitter handle because they've been really great to this program. And let's get back to this program. Speaking of program.
And so have you guys experimented with any of these pay models yet? And when does that start to happen?
So the Identity Verified certificate launched in January of 2013. So it's been going for about 5 months now. And we're actually seeing some very nice uses there. People are getting value from a credential that is A, tied to the real world identity, B, can be verified by an employer using a verification code that we provide so that anyone can confirm that all that time that you spend doing that homework, that was you actually did that, and C, that it's a credential that carries the university brand, so it has the full weight of our top university behind it, and so I think it's a real value to people.
So that's very interesting. There is a code that they can come to the Coursera site and type in this unique code.
Yeah.
And so unlike if I said I got an MBA from Stanford, which is kind of hard to verify, I guess.
Well, you could. I mean, you can contact the registrar, but it'll probably take you 2 weeks, yeah.
And it's kind of weird to do that, to call up the registrar. I mean, well, of course, Yahoo should have done that. Inside joke, but this actual code, it seems like a real neat innovation where they could actually go to a URL, type in the code, and actually, do they get to see the results of the test, or how deep do they get to go into verification?
You know, each person gets 2 verification codes. One is just to show that you completed the course, but there is an additional verification code that the student may or may not choose to present that actually goes into the full course record, so that the employer could actually look at, how you did on the different homeworks and scores and things.
Wow, how wonderfully innovative. Yeah. So we could actually go in, and if George Bush had done this, we'd see his exact performance in each course.
Not quite, but yeah, but
well, he'd have to allow it,
yeah.
Of course.
So currently we don't provide a full portfolio of the work, although that's something that we could do. But certainly percentile rankings in the course and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So people who are proud that they took it could give one code.
Exactly.
People who are proud of their position in this ranking could give another code.
That's right.
It's very diplomatic.
That's right.
What do people pay for these codes? What do they pay for this verification?
Well, I mean, it's the whole package, right?
Yeah.
There's also the identity verification, which, by the way, has a really cool technology that I should tell you about. Because the way it's done is that you submit your picture ID, which we compare to your webcam photo. So there's a real person. She's called Kate. She's very nice. And she compares your picture to your webcam photo. And then you create a biometric profile that uses keystrokes. So it turns out that if you and I type the same phrase, the rhythm, the time differences between the letters will be very different. And you can't forge mine and I can't forge yours.
Right.
So it's a signature that allows us to verify that every time you log into the platform, it's really you. It's not somebody else doing the work for you.
Right. This biometric, people have talked about using this for passwords. It never really came to pass, but it was an Israeli-based company, I think, that made it.
I think there's been a bunch of different efforts with different types of biometrics, but it works really well.
And so you just were able to get an API to do that? That's incredible. You didn't have to make that technology.
No, that's exactly right. And it works really well. It allows us to confirm that it's really you. Because it turns out if you go on Google for Take My Online Class For Me, there's dozens of companies.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. So
you pay $500. I shouldn't advertise them, I suppose, because but it turns out that you can pay some. I think it's $500 or something for somebody to
take your University of Phoenix course.
Yes, exactly. Now nobody would pay $500 to take our course, of course.
That's the third time we've brought up University of Phoenix.
Well, you brought them up. I didn't bring them up.
Well, what do you think of them? I mean, listen. You have this incredibly innovative platform. You get 100,000 people. They're the elephant in the room. Let's talk about the elephant. What do you actually think of University of Phoenix? Is it honestly?
All
right, diplomatically.
Okay. Let's see.
Sugarcoat it.
Boy. I think that there is a value to provide.
Oh, wow. I don't think you need to continue. I think we know what you think of it. If you can't stop laughing when you give this answer.
I think it's important to make education accessible to a large number of people, and I think that one of the strengths of the University of Phoenix that they have done, and I think they should be commended for that, is first of all this sort of notion that education should be something that we should use to appeal to as many people that can benefit from it as possible. And I think that the flexibility that is offered by an education that is largely online and the way in which it caters to a working adult and the lifestyle of somebody who has 2 jobs and 3 kids and a mortgage and so on, I think that was an important component of it. I think they also put in place some support systems for students that are also valuable and could be replicated by more traditional colleges. That being said, I think that one has, at this point, other alternatives for getting great education for a much more cost-effective way, and I think that University of Phoenix should think about how it can provide value for its students that is more commensurate with that.
I think your PR person's happy right now. But I mean,
was that diplomatic enough?
I think it's pretty diplomatic. I mean, so they identified a great space. And it's great that people can work from home. You described what's great about online learning, but the fact is they're charging a large amount of money, and you're charging nothing except for maybe this accreditation and the verification. What is accreditation and verification cost? We didn't get to that for your service.
It varies from course to course, but averages about $50, which is the price of a restaurant.
50.
50.
50. 50. And they're charging $5,000 or $10,000 at University of Phoenix.
Not per course, but yes, I think their price per course is something like $500-600. So it's about an order of magnitude difference. That's right.
And
of course, they get a degree at the end. Then we don't provide degrees. Right. But I think that one of the things that we've started to do is to work with universities to get some of those courses transferable into a degree program, so that people can effectively use that as credit towards degree.
When do you? And so, if that were to happen, we hear constantly, and it's come up a couple of times here, the value of college is obviously very expensive. It's very elitist in some cases. People are going into debt. Is it possible that the solution to debt in college might be to do your first 2 years on Coursera, and then the last 2 years for $20,000 a year would only be, $40,000 in debt, as opposed to coming out $80,000 in debt?
So I should say that the debt problem should be looked at more closely. So when people talk about debt, most of that very large number is actually coming from institutions like the for-profit universities. Very little of it is coming from undergraduate programs in either public or private institutions. The publics, because the tuitions are actually fairly reasonable in most public institutions, and the privates because the students that have financial need do get financial aid by and large. So if you talk to universities, including places like Stanford with its very high tuition rates, students don't emerge from an undergraduate degree with an extensive amount of debt by and large. It's mostly from the for-profits that the debt problem comes up. Now, having said that, I think that this is a way in which we can make college more economical, and in 2 separate ways. One is, I think, yes, you could maybe hope that some people will be able to reduce the amount of tuition that they pay by coming into college with a certain amount of credit. And in some ways, this is analogous to AP credits, which is a mechanism that's used right now, only much broader base, and with, I think, a much richer set of courses that would be available. The other places, we're actually starting to work with academic institutions to provide those first 2 years of gen ed and gateway courses in a more cost-effective way within the academic institution. The benefit of that being that the students then have access to the kind of support structure that an academic institution can provide, tutors or teaching assistants or mentors, which we currently don't provide.
And you don't ever see yourself going into the real world. There'll be next to the Apple store and the Microsoft store over here at the mall, a Coursera store. But there are people who are getting together in groups and doing essentially that with Coursera material, I understand.
That's right. And we think that is actually a tremendously valuable thing because, you know, I think that there's maybe 10 or 15% of the population that can take an online class without any kind of support system around them, a human support system, and actually complete successfully. Most people need that human touch. And we find much higher success rates, completion rates, with students that have that social community around them. Ideally, even something that is mentored or facilitated by a group leader. And some groups naturally select such a leader, and they tend to be more successful than the ones that don't have that. So we think this is a tremendously empowering thing that will greatly increase the success rates in these programs.
And that is the big critique, if anybody has them, of
Right.
the Coursera's is, oh my God, 100,000 people sign up and only 4,000 people complete.
Right.
But of course, the course would have had 40 people complete it in person, so it's still 100 times X.
You know, that is one response to that, but I think there's a deeper response to that, to the completion problem, and I'm really glad you brought that up. About our completion rate's about 8% on average. But what people fail to notice when they point that out is that of the 100,000 or so who enroll in a course, only a relatively small fraction actually intend to complete the course. Most of the people who sign up for these online courses have no intent to complete them. Half of them don't even show up to the first lecture because, you know, they signed up, a month and a half has elapsed and they're doing something else now. Of the ones that show up, a good majority are just there to watch the lectures. They're treating this like a PBS documentary or an online textbook or something like
TED
that.
Talk.
Exactly, it's a long TED Talk. But so of the people who submit the first homework, which is a relatively low bar of intent to complete, 45% complete the course. Of the people who sign up and in an entry survey declare that they have a high level of commitment to complete the course, 84% complete the course.
So we're measuring from the wrong point.
We're measuring a large population of people who are treating this like a book that they take from the library, read a few chapters, and bring it back.
Right.
And of the people, by the way, signature track increases, this verified certificate increases retention rates. So people who sign up for that have some skin in the game. They complete at a higher rate than the people who don't, even among the ones who declare commitments to complete to begin with.
Let's talk about what's the end result of some of these courses. I've heard some extraordinary things from professors about there being a large number of people outperforming the Stanford students at the end of the semester. So. Right. If you had, you know, 2 or 3 students in this sort of percentile, you might have 50 people online reach that level. Is that correct? Or what's some of the highlights of extraordinary performance coming from outside the universities?
I mean, there are some people, it shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, this draws from a worldwide population of talent, of people that wouldn't normally have an opportunity to attend an institution like Stanford. So it's not surprising that some of them are incredibly talented and incredibly bright. So we've heard multiple reports of people who just were so excelled at these courses that they were brought on a full scholarship to some of the academic institutions that offered these courses, and are now students at these academic institutions.
So are these honeypots in a way for the universities? Do the universities look at these as a way to, you know, capture these students?
Among other things, that is one of the incentives for universities. I was told recently by one of our university partners that they needed to do this because they wanted access to this worldwide talent pool.
What's the, we heard earlier in the event, 60, 70, 80% of people signing up for these are non-US. Are these numbers correct?
Yeah, only a third of our students are US. The rest are non-US. 40% are in the developing world.
40%?
40%.
Can you tell us any statistics about the developing world versus the United States in terms of completion or performance?
If I remember correctly, the completion rates, well, it varies from country to country, but I think it's comparable or potentially even higher depending on the country than in the United States.
What are some of the outliers? Have you found certain countries disproportionately represented on Coursera or certain courses?
How do you define disproportionately? I mean, currently, in terms of the overall user base, our penetration into the internet, into the people who have internet, is higher in the United States than in other countries.
Right, but have you seen a small company all of a sudden, you know, there's 100 people from Colombia and a larger country has 10, because somehow word got out there. A professor found out about it and emailed it to their friends and students.
Yeah, so it's not proportionate to the size of the country, and there's multiple factors. I'm not sure if getting the word out there for a particular professor is it, but there's definitely countries, partly it depends on language. So countries where English is the dominant language tend to be on the platform more than
New Zealand, Australia, Canada,
UK
Ireland.
and Canada, but our largest, India, is large, much larger than China, not because of I think lack of interest in China in education, but a combination of language and firewall issues. So not because we're being blocked, we're not, but simply because since there's no data server in China, everything has to go through the firewall and just slower. So it's just harder to access the content. We're not being blocked by the Chinese government.
Not yet.
I want to tell you today about Mandrill. Mandrill is transactional email from our friends over at MailChimp. And they have servers all over the world. So delivery is instantaneous everywhere. And they have amazing real-time analytics. You can monitor your performance so you can make improvements easily. Now, if you don't know what transactional email is, where have you been? This is the email like you got a friend request, or somebody posted a comment after you posted a comment, or your password got reset, or an order is late for delivery, or an order has arrived. All those important transactional emails are critical for your startup, and you need Mandrill app to help get them there on time. And you can do A/B split testing. They constantly roll out new features, just like the MailChimp folks constantly roll out new features. Mandrill does that as well. It's super easy to use, and the pricing is incredible. The first 12,000 emails a month are free. What? Yes, that's right, free. And after that, you pay only on usage. They're not going to try to scam you by getting you to sign a huge contract. Just pay as you go, only what you use. If you use less, you don't pay for it. If you use more, you pay for what you use. That's the way all services should work, and Mandrill is leading the way on that charge. And there's no feature gating, so all the features are available to all users, whether you're paying for the top level of service or the bottom level of service. You just pay as you go. You get every feature. And you can sign up at mandrill.com, Mandrill. Just think man and a drill, a man with a drill, Mandrill. Mandrill.com, and thank Mandrill app on Twitter. It's an amazing service. It's really fantastic, and I really thank them. We're using it over here at inside.com. So great job, Mandrill, and let's get back to this amazing episode.
You've been, thank you so much for coming to the event, by the way, because you've been traveling an extraordinary amount.
Yes.
And it's not for vacation, despite it being the season. This is growing internationally.
Yes.
Tell us about how it's growing, not just people taking the courses internationally, but it's growing in other ways internationally. How?
Well, we're fortunate enough to be able to have been able to attract many universities that are outside the United States. So initially we were a purely US-based effort, but I think we recognized relatively early that we didn't want to be in a position where it's the United States teaching the rest of the world. That seems to, smack of a certain intellectual elitism that we think is just not warranted. So one of the things that we've done as a systematic effort is seek out universities in other parts of the world, and specifically also seek out universities that would teach in languages other than English to partly address the language issue. So right now we're actually able to offer courses in 7 different languages. I mean, English is still the largest, but we have courses in French, in Spanish, Chinese, Italian, German, and Arabic is our most recent language. And right now it's still a handful of courses, but specifically French, for example, is growing very rapidly. And some of you might be wondering, well, why French? And the answer is, well, the half of Sub-Saharan Africa, the poor half of Sub-Saharan Africa is French-speaking, and we have been aiming at courses that are entry-level courses in French so that people can take some of those courses and within a couple of courses actually put themselves in line for a white-collar job, whereas otherwise they would not have been eligible for that. For example, introductory programming in French offered by the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne. And so that was French. That was our second language. Our third is Spanish. We have 3 Spanish-speaking institutions right now, 2 from Mexico, 1 from Spain. And we're really excited about growing into other languages as well.
And people building off of the materials, you don't plan on building locations for people to take courses? It's not going to be an Apple store?
No, we're not. We're an internet company.
Right. So if people start building, companies around hosting these courses. Is that something you would encourage? Because we do have people doing sort of birds of a feather, meeting together to take the courses. But what if a individual were to, you know, start a group in some country where they decided they would charge to come to a class and be that other half of the MOOC?
So right now, if you're charging for it, so it's a commercial use, it's against our terms of service.
Right.
So it's analogous to, you know, you can rent a movie from Netflix for individual use, but you can't show it in a movie theater for 50 people and charge for it. So it's the same kind of terms of service. But we would be very interested in, if somebody wanted to do that, especially in places where it added a significant value, like in the developing world where people really didn't have locations with access to internet, we would be very open to having that kind of conversation.
And what is it today about online courses that seems to be working when 10 years ago when we talked about online courses, it just didn't seem to be working?
Right.
What's changed? Is it the consumers?
I think it's a combination of different things. First of all, it's the technology itself. Both the back end, things like cloud computing is absolutely essential to the success of this. I mean, if we had to build our own server farms, we would eat that in the water. Scalable, you know, flexible and so on. The second is stuff on the front end side in terms of the user experience that really contributes to the usability of this in ways that, you know, the more clunky interfaces that existed 10 years ago just would not have been a very compelling experience for students. And then the other part is really the sociology of this. The generation that we're talking to today has grown up expecting to consume content via the internet. And furthermore, I think even more importantly, expecting to consume social interaction via the web. And since a big part of these online courses is in fact the social experience, the community that gets built up around them, the birds of a feather, the discussion forums, and so on, the peer grading, that experience is such a critical part, and I don't think would have been something that people would have found as acceptable 10 years ago.
Do you think this next generation will prefer this method of education, this mode?
I think the next generation already prefers this mode of education. I think people get weary of sitting, and in fact they find it disconcerting to walk into a college class and be lectured at. I mean, currently it's not 100%, but a good, I would say over 50% prefer. Maybe about 2/3 prefer this mode of instruction. I expect as people get accustomed to the idea that it's okay for the professor to provide value in ways other than standing and lecturing, that fraction will grow.
How are professors adapting to it? Is it
hard.
Yeah, is it hard for them?
It's hard. It's hard not, I mean, it's hard from two different ways. It's hard first because of people's expectation that the way they provide value, a professor provides value, is by the dissemination of content. And it's hard for them to accept the fact that that's not the way that they should interact with students, or that they can interact in other ways. And second, it's actually hard. I mean, I've been doing this classroom flipping in my own Stanford class for about 5 years now. And it's a lot easier to come in with last year's notes and basically, you know, just perform, right? It's a lot easier to do that than it is to come in and say, let's talk. You tell me what's confusing you. Let's solve problems together. What's your solution? And I have to think on my feet. Is it a good solution or a bad solution? So it's considerably more challenging to teach this way. So when people sometimes come and complain, professors in many cases come and complain that this is relegating them to the role of teaching assistants, my answer is, you haven't tried this. This is actually harder than the kind of teaching that you're doing right now.
And where do you think, what will this look like in 10 years if you're successful? What will the world look like?
So can I give you a 3-part answer?
You can give me a 5-part answer.
Okay. So the first part is, you know, currently we have close to 400 courses. The average curriculum of a large university is about 5,000 to 6,000 courses. So we have a ways to go, but we're growing really fast. So my hope is that in 5 to 10 years, we will have most of a curriculum of medium to large academic institutions that we can teach anybody, anywhere, anything they want to learn, which would be really cool. The second part of this is that I think that education in our academic institutions has effectively not changed dramatically in how we do it, since the invention of the printing press. That's an awfully long time for a sector not to change the way it does business. And I think that what we have now is an opportunity for the first significant change in the way pedagogy is done, to this notion of, people study in their own time, at their own rate, achieve mastery, and they actually come to learn the kinds of skills that we keep hearing from industry we don't teach well enough right now. Critical thinking, problem solving, taking an ill-defined problem and figuring out what it even means, debate, all of those things that we don't currently teach will be taught much more extensively in our academic institutions. And the last one is one that you might not expect. Our platform is extensively instrumented. It means we measure every single event that happens. You rewind a video, pause a video, submit a forum post, look at a forum post, submit a quiz, everything is instrumented, which means that we have the opportunity, and we're measuring it at the level of millions of students. So the study of human learning until now has been very much an anecdotal science. People write papers on populations of 10 students and extrapolate from that. We finally have the opportunity to take the study of human learning and turn it into a data science, a transformation that has revolutionized disciplines like astronomy with high-throughput telescopy, biology with high-throughput sequencing, medicine now with electronic health records. We can now do that for the study of human learning, and that, I think, could really transform the way in which we teach and learn.
What's the most frustrating part today about taking an online course for people? Because it's not perfect yet, right? You're in that process of perfecting it. So what is the biggest complaint? What is the thing that frustrates you most, that if you had a magic wand, you'd just be like, we solved this issue?
There's two things that I think we could see significant improvements on. The first is the current mode of assessments that we use is somewhat limited in terms of what we can grade at scale. It's very much, so for what the computer-based grading, automated grading is, it's difficult for instructors to construct those effective assessments and provide students with meaningful feedback about exactly where they went wrong. And so I think that in 5 years we will see completely different mechanisms for assessment at scale. And the second one that is very different is currently the whole notion of social learning is done largely outside the platform, with the exception of the discussion forums and to a certain extent peer grading. And let me call out Hui, who wrote our peer grading system, sitting right here in the audience. And I think that to the extent, I think that there's a lot of stuff that we can do that would improve that experience.
Last question before we go to the audience, and I know you have to go soon. Motivation. It's great that we've taken down all the walls. Anybody can get to any course now.
Yes.
Or, not any course, but
a lot.
God, and all this information is out there. Which means some people I've heard say, okay, anybody can get on the internet today, in America, let's just say. Anybody can get to Khan Academy. Khan Academy can get anybody to the college level courses. What's your excuse now? Why are you not able to get ahead in life and society? Yeah. Very sort of type A view of the world.
Yeah. Life is more complicated than that.
Clearly.
Yeah.
What role do you guys play in motivation and getting people who, now that they really do have free access to this stuff, make them aware they have it? Okay, let's assume they become aware that they have access to it. How do you get them to actually be motivated to take the courses and to follow through? Is that your responsibility?
Boy, that's a really good question. I mean, there's certainly a role that we can play in that, in increasing levels of motivation. Ideas like gamification, badges, rewards like the kind of credentials that you can earn. Social learning is another way of keeping people retained and motivated.
What do you mean by that, social learning?
So, for example, there are studies in traditional academic institutions that if you take students from disadvantaged backgrounds and send them to college as a cohort, a group of 10 from a similar socioeconomic background, their retention rates go from lower teens to somewhere in the 80s and 90s in terms of college completion. I mean, the differences are huge, and I think we're seeing those differences also in our student base. People who go into these courses with a study group, a strong study group that persists, they're much more likely to complete the course than the ones who take it on their own. So I think there's things that we could do, but ultimately, you know, I think that I don't know that I can take somebody who's truly unmotivated and using an electronic platform, get them to complete the class. So ultimately, people need to take control of their own destiny to a certain extent.
Let's take a couple questions. It's interesting about the social learning. I mean, we are pack animals at our
Yeah,
core, right? We like to do things together.
Yeah.
I mean, could you create a feature where if you got 10 people from one group, you gave them, you know, 10 accreditations for the price of one or something, like, but only if they hit 10, and only if 7 make it to the end?
There are definitely ideas along those lines that would encourage group work, and I think is a role that we can help play in increasing motivation. That's right.
Question.
Yeah, actually, I think it's connected to what you said now about collaboration. NovoEd actually is coming out with some kind of collaboration, and are you going to do something similar?
Well, I don't know what they're coming out with, so I don't know if it's going to be similar, but I agree with their idea that collaborative learning is important, and certainly we have our own ideas on how to execute on that.
Which company was this?
It's called NovoEd.
NovoEd, okay. Great. Another question.
Hi, Daphne. My name is E. And I'm actually executing on that opportunity you mentioned in Sub Saharan Africa, where we're actually extending open online courses, partnering with universities on the ground to offer the other half. One of my question is mobile. The mobile experience is horrible. And in Sub Saharan Africa, we literally have no other option, right? The broadband doesn't work despite Google's, Google balance and stuff. The only way to get through to mobile is through the telcos. Are you guys going to work, or are you guys have anything in the works with, economizing the data that's transmitted via the videos, working on the experience so it actually works on mobile?
I did mention you're going to have to do customer support here, yeah? When is mobile coming?
So we are very delighted to report that after several months of searching, we have actually hired a mobile developer who will lead the mobile team. That's been something we've tried to do for a long time. It turns out these people are really hard to find. So it's now something that I can say is not just on our radar, but also on our immediate timeline to create a mobile application of which access in parts of the world where you don't have broadband 24/7 would be a big part of that. It's not the only part of, there's other things you can do, location-based services. For example, social learning, you want to find a group around you. There's a bunch of things that you can do.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
There are 50 people within 50 miles of you taking this course.
Easily.
Oh my.
With the side of user.
Wow, that could be so transformative.
Isn't that cool? So there's a bunch of things.
Like creating a book group around the course.
That's right. Or, I want to do my Coursera homework. Is there somebody within 15 minutes drive who wants to sit and have a little study group discussion with me? There's a bunch of things that you can do with mobile that are beyond just the 24, the sort of the lack of broadband access. But so all of that's now going to be coming that we finally have somebody.
A marketplace of like coaches or proctors, within Coursera, approved people, or just even if it was a peer marketplace, could help with that motivation problem. Like I could pay somebody $25 or $50 or $100 to coach me through whatever lessons I'm having issues with.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right, because like I said, there's the 15% who might be able to get along without this, but some people do and can benefit tremendously from the help, and we think that's going to be an important part of this going forward.
Let's take a final question.
With your background in artificial intelligence and machine learning, how much do you focus on creating a better teaching system altogether? With the amount of data that you're pulling in, are you looking at making like the ultimate machine teaching system?
Is it going to be adaptive?
There's an interesting question about adaptive learning that I don't have a good answer to right now. So first, let me say that general purpose adaptive learning is actually kind of hard to implement. It's a very labor intensive process to take even a single course and identify the concept map for it and align specific assessments with the associated concepts so that you can figure out when somebody gets question 3 wrong, what does it tell us about their understanding of this concept versus that concept. And so people do that, and they do that for the courses that are very high enrollment, very basic in math and physics and chemistry and so on. Doing this for several thousand courses is going to be prohibitive in terms of the labor. Now, there might be some clever things that we can come up with to help address that sort of knowledge engineering gap, as it's called. But I think before we do that, there is an interesting question that should be answered about how important different levels of adaptivity are. So right now the system is adaptive in the sense that a student can adapt their own learning to the system. They can watch and rewatch a video if they didn't get it the first time. They can attempt the exercise multiple times because we have randomization and so on, so that they really get it. And that's a baseline level of adaptation that that is a lot easier to achieve than the full-scale adaptive learning that sends you, oh, you didn't get this, so you should go back and watch that video and try that exercise and go back and do this thing again. I don't know what the delta between those two levels is, and I think that's an empirical question that deserves study.
And you do know that it costs a magnitude more to make that adaptive learning.
It does, and it's also very difficult for the instructor. It requires a fair bit of work from the instructor to have that.
Yeah.
And since creating an online course is already a pretty labor-intensive thing for the instructor. If you added this additional requirement on top of them, we're going to get a lot fewer courses being created because people are going to say, whoa, this is already too much work for me as it is.
Daphne Koller, Coursera.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.